Chapter 1. Desert Rescue. Elias Ward pulled hard on the reins when he spotted the figure crumpled in the crimson sand. An Apache woman lay motionless, her powerful build caked with grime and dried blood. Dark bruises from a lashing covered her shoulders and spine, while leather strips still bound her wrists, clear evidence of brutal punishment. Her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Elias jumped from his horse and knelt beside her. Heat waves shimmered off the scorched earth, but a colder thought gripped his mind. This might be a trap. The Apache had warned him repeatedly to stay out of tribal matters. He pressed his fingers to her throat. Her pulse fluttered so weakly it seemed ready to vanish entirely. Abandoning her here meant certain death under the merciless sun. Gritting his teeth, Elias pulled his knife and severed the leather bonds. He lifted her onto his shoulder. She felt solid as a grain sack and draped her across his horse's back. "Hell," he muttered, spurring his mount forward. Red dust billowed behind them as they raced toward shelter, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood mixed with desert heat. Elias didn't glance back. Anyone watching would know exactly where his loyalties lay, and this time there'd be no retreat from the consequences. Chapter 2. Reluctant Haven. Elias thundered through his ramshackle gate, carefully carrying the unconscious woman inside his cabin. He laid her on a worn blanket near the stone hearth, then quickly built up the fire. Golden flames cast dancing shadows across his weathered, sweat-streaked features. He retrieved his wooden pail and scraped together what precious water remained. During drought season, every drop was worth more than silver. But Elias dampened a rag and began cleaning dust and crusted blood from her face. Her wrist pulse remained thread-thin. Yet she lived. Elias had always avoided other people's troubles. Years earlier, sickness had swept through the territory, claiming his wife and 2 small boys. Since then, he'd existed like a specter, caring only for his parched land and meager cattle herd. He avoided town and steered even further from complications involving others, but tonight's actions shattered that isolation. Completely. The woman before him, he'd learned her name was Takina, differed from other Apache women he'd encountered. Her frame was formidable, with muscled arms and broad shoulders resembling a seasoned fighter. The whip marks striping her back suggested severe punishment, likely for violating tribal customs. One thing Elias knew with certainty: if the tribe discovered his interference, they'd mark him as an enemy. Outside, darkness fell swiftly. Prairie winds swept sand through cabin wall gaps, carrying the day's lingering heat. Elias fed more wood to the flames and settled beside Takina. The firelight illuminated his face, weathered and sun-scarred, with steel-gray eyes both distant and profound. He offered her the last water in his small bowl. She parted her lips slightly, drank slowly, then drifted back into unconsciousness. Elias exhaled heavily and drew his rifle close, keeping it within reach. He leaned against the log wall, eyes fixed on the entrance. He understood exactly what kind of people would abandon a woman to desert death and knew they might return to complete their work. Tonight, if they came, Elias Ward would be waiting in that doorway. Chapter 3. Wary trust. The hearth fire had dimmed to glowing coals when Elias dozed in his chair, rifle balanced across his knees. A soft rustling jerked him alert. Takina had pushed herself upright, dark eyes wild with alarm. In one swift motion, her large hand seized the small blade beside the cook stove. Steel gleamed in the ember light. Elias remained motionless. He slowly raised both palms, voice low and gravelly. "If you plan to cut me, make it quick. But if you want to survive, drop that knife," Takina panted, perspiration beading her brow. Her gaze swept the cabin, small, aged, but not a cell. Then to the man before her, tall, lean, stubbled, with eyes both steady and cold. She hesitated. Elias kept his tone calm. "I freed your hands. That door stays open if you want to leave. But outside, there's nothing except burning sand and carrion birds." The blade shook in her grip. After a long pause, she released her breath and let it clatter to the floor. Her powerful frame collapsed like a toppled oak. Elias stepped forward, retrieved the weapon, and handed her the remaining water bowl. "Drink. You need this more than me." Takina accepted the bowl, sipping slowly while never taking her eyes off Elias. As if determining whether this was some elaborate snare, without another word, Elias walked onto the porch and sat on the step's edge, rifle across his lap. Takina tilted her head, watching through the doorway. In the moonlight, the man's silhouette remained motionless as granite, only the thin wisps of cigarette smoke revealing any movement. Throughout that entire night, Takina couldn't sleep. Each time nightmares surfaced, she opened her eyes to find Elias still there, never entering but never departing either. A strange sensation began stirring in her chest, something she'd believed lost forever. The feeling of protection when dawn began lightening the sky. Elias hadn't shifted position. He simply turned his head and spoke quietly. "Stay until your strength returns if you want. Leave if you prefer. The decision is yours." Takina stared at him, then looked away. She said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders. That was her answer. Chapter 4. Shared labor sunrise painted the cabin's weathered roof with golden light. Takina could stand independently now. She stepped into the yard, shoulder roughly bandaged, but her gaze sharp and alert. Elias was mending a broken fence section, not bothering to glance up. "You're stronger," he said evenly. "If you want food, there's work hauling water behind the livestock pen." Takina said nothing, but moments later picked up a wooden pail and headed toward the water tank. Her thick, muscled arms flexed beneath sun-darkened skin as she drew up the bucket. Elias glanced over. Someone who'd nearly perished just yesterday was already capable of physical labor. It surprised him. That day Takina spoke almost nothing, simply shadowing Elias in silence, observing how he patched fencing and mixed mud for wall repairs. As afternoon faded and Elias finally rested, she suddenly stepped forward, grabbed the hammer, and finished driving the remaining posts. Elias stood still momentarily, then gave a quiet nod and allowed her to continue. That evening, for the first time, Takina lit the kitchen fire without prompting. She prepared simple rabbit stew and placed it before Elias wordlessly. He examined the bowl, then looked at her. A silent nod was his only gratitude. In the following days, the cabin's silence broke. Sounds of hammers, shovels, and clashing wood filled the air. Elias dug a fresh water hole while Takina hauled stones to block wind. Her strength was remarkable. She rebuilt an entire fence section in a single afternoon. One evening, as sunlight dimmed, they sat together on the front porch. Elias lit a cigarette while Takina whittled with a small knife. For the first time she spoke. "Why rescue me?" Elias stared at the cracked, parched fields. "Because I couldn't bear leaving someone out there. I've witnessed too much death." Takina remained silent. After a moment, she nodded. A simple explanation, but something inside her seemed to unfurl and relax. That night, as wind rustled through the old roof, Takina no longer tossed restlessly. For the first time in months, she slept deeply outside the cabin. Elias's slow, steady footsteps circled the homestead, keeping watch. Chapter 5. Confrontation. That afternoon, the sky suddenly turned harsh gold. Elias was adjusting his old horse's reins when distant hoofbeats echoed. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a dust trail was expanding. "Unwelcome visitors," Elias muttered, grabbing the Winchester propped against the porch. Takina heard the sound and emerged outside. The moment she spotted the riders, she froze. 3 Apache warriors on horseback blocked the ranch entrance. War paint marked their faces, their eyes cold as winter. The lead rider nudged his mount forward and spoke in a deep, emotionless voice. "Our woman is here. Surrender her." Takina stepped backward, instinctively gripping the small blade at her side. Elias moved forward, positioning himself between the cabin door and the riders, rifle steady in his hands. "She's injured. She has the right to remain until she recovers," another warrior snarled, his voice rising. "She was banished by the tribe. She has no right to exist on this land. Shelter her, and you become our enemy?" Elias didn't lower his weapon. His gray eyes were cold steel. "If you want to kill someone, you'll have to go through me first." The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bowstring. Wind kicked up red dust, swirling around the horse's hooves from behind Elias. Takina stared at him, his face calm but shoulders tense, ready to fire at the first threatening move. Finally, the lead warrior lowered his spear, his gaze burning with rage. "We will return," Next time, we won't come alone." They jerked their reins and galloped away, leaving behind a dust trail and heavy, suffocating silence in the yard. Takina gripped her knife so tightly her knuckles went white. Elias turned back toward her, fire still flickering in his eyes. "They'll return with reinforcements," he said quietly. "If you still want to stay, we need to prepare." Takina nodded, her eyes now lit with a different flame, not fear, but the burning will to survive. Chapter 6. The Stand That Night. Elias lit the lantern and dragged out every ammunition round and sandbag from the shed. Takina stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, helping barricade windows and build yard defenses. For the first time since arriving, she was no longer just a refugee. She had chosen to stand with him for the coming battle. 3 days later, before sunset, red dust began rising on the horizon. Elias stood on the porch, Winchester ready. Takina had tied back her hair, gripping a spear and knife, her stance that of a warrior prepared for combat. Hoofbeats grew thunderous until nearly 20 Apache riders swept in, encircling the ranch completely. The air thickened with horse sweat and tanned leather. The warriors remained silent except for their mounts' heavy snorting. An elder stepped forward, old, with long silver hair and a deerskin cloak draped over his shoulders. His face was stern as granite. He looked at Elias, then at Takina standing tall behind him. She was cast out. "She belongs to dust. Why do you keep her?" Elias didn't lower his rifle. "Because she still lives, and she has the right to choose." A murmur rippled through the circle. A young warrior shouted, "She dishonored the tribe. She cannot be permitted to live." Takina stepped forward, her voice thunderous. "I dishonored no one. I was punished for not bearing children, but that is no crime." Silence spread like a wave. Warriors looked at one another, though fire still burned in their eyes. The elder turned his gaze to Takina. "You choose to live here under a white man's roof. That means severing all tribal ties." Takina gripped her spear shaft and nodded. "I choose life here." The elder remained quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. "We leave tonight, but at dawn I return with the Council of Elders. If you're still here then, you'll no longer be a daughter of the tribe." He turned to Elias. "And you will bear the consequences." He wheeled his horse. And the entire war party followed, hoofs thundering as red dust swirled over the fence line. Once they'd vanished, Elias lowered his rifle. Takina still stood tall, chest rising and falling with each breath. Elias looked at her, voice low. "By morning, everything changes." "Are you certain?" Takina met his eyes, her gaze burning with fire. "I already died once out there." "I won't die again," Elias nodded, tightening his grip on the rifle. The night ahead would be long, and when sunrise came, this ranch might become a battlefield. Chapter 7. Final choice. Dawn turned the sky deep burnished bronze. Elias had awakened long before the rooster crowed, standing on the porch with his rifle fully loaded. Inside, Takina was tightening her shoulder bandage, eyes sharp and cold as steel. A horn sounded in the distance, low and thunderous like an approaching storm. Then riders appeared. Not just a small group this time, but the full council of elders with their escort. At least 50 people surrounded the ranch in a solid circle. A path opened before the gate. The silver-haired elder rode forward, followed by 2 older women with dark hair, streaked gray members of the matriarchal council with power to decide. Takina's fate. Takina stepped out, standing tall. Morning light caught the scars on her sun-darkened skin-whip marks that hadn't fully healed. She no longer stood behind Elias, but beside him. Shoulder to shoulder. One elder woman spoke. "Takina, daughter of the tribe, today we ask for the final time. Do you choose to return and face judgment, or do you choose permanent exile?" Takina took a deep breath. Early wind swept through, tossing her hair into wild disorder. "I will not return," she said clearly. "I choose life. Life on my own terms, not under unjust sentencing." Murmurs rippled through the circle. Some warriors gripped spears tighter. Others bowed their heads as if silently accepting her words. The other elder woman gave a slow nod. "From this day forward, your name is struck from our lineage. You are no longer a daughter of the tribe. You will not be buried in ancestral soil, but also from this day on, The tribe will no longer hunt you. The old chief turned his gaze to Elias, eyes sharp as blades. You sheltered her. That means her fate is now bound to yours. If she sheds blood because of this choice, that blood is also on your hands. Elias didn't look away. I understand. A moment passed, one that felt like a lifetime. Then the elder raised his hand. One by one, warriors turned their horses and withdrew from the circle. Only when hoofbeats had faded did Takina finally exhale. Her broad shoulders trembled, but her eyes blazed with fire. Elias looked at her for a long time, then gave a slow nod. You just chose a new life, Takina answered softly, voice rough but proud. No, I chose myself. Epilogue. New beginnings that afternoon. The sky turned pitch black without warning. After weeks of drought, the first raindrops fell on the dusty cabin roof. The scent of wet earth rose thick in the air, as if the entire prairie was releasing a long, weary sigh. Elias stood on the porch, rain soaking through his shirt, watching the cracked fields slowly soften under falling water. Takina stepped out behind him, dark hair wild in the wind, rain glistening on her muscular arms. The storm came quickly, Elias said, voice rough. Takina said nothing. She stepped down from the porch, tilting her face skyward, eyes closed. Rain mixed with dust and dried blood on her skin, washing away everything remaining of her past. Elias watched her for a long moment. She was no longer the abandoned woman he'd found in the desert. Standing before him now was a warrior and a free human being. As the rain began to ease, Elias stepped into the yard and stood beside her. They remained in silence for a long time, listening to the steady patter. You can leave, Elias said slowly. They won't hunt you anymore. The road south still leads to town. Takina turned to him, eyes calm but deep. And do you want me to leave? Elias was quiet. Rain rolled down his sun-darkened face. Finally, he shook his head. No, I think this ranch is no longer big enough for just one person. A faint smile crossed Takina's lips, the first true smile since the day he'd saved her. That afternoon they worked side by side, clearing the yard, turning soil, repairing fences. Takina carried the heaviest logs while Elias drove posts. By the time sun broke through clouds again, the ranch looked different, stronger, cleaner, filled with the scent of new earth. When night came, Elias lit a fire in the yard. They sat beside it, watching sparks drift into the dark sky. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel alone. Takina laid her spear on the ground, a silent promise. Elias lit a cigarette and smiled gently. Tomorrow we build a new horse pen. Takina nodded, firelight casting her face in warm glow, strong but peaceful. In the quiet of night, rain had stopped. All that remained was the smell of damp earth and the feeling that something new had begun. Sometimes we don't get to choose where we're born, but we can choose where we stand. And sometimes choosing to stand beside someone else means daring to stand against the world. In that moment when two lost souls decide not to walk away, a true home is built not just from wood and nails, but from courage and trust. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you that we all deserve the freedom to choose our own path, then you've touched the heart of what we create here. At Wild West Echoes, we bring you tales of impossible courage, fierce independence, and quiet moments that change everything. Stories where honor lives in difficult choices and love defies the rules of society. So, if Elias and Takina's journey meant something to you, don't let it end here. Subscribe, join our growing community, and saddle up for the next unforgettable adventure. Because out here in the Wild West, freedom may be hard won, but when it comes, it builds something that even time cannot destroy.